Okay, time for our fiscal focus segment brought to you by InfoChoice, your choice of information on Australian consumer finance. Now, there's a new Australian finance book that's currently on shelves at the moment, and it's called Buying Happiness: Learn to Invest Your Time and Money Better. And it's by a financial educator and host of the hugely popular Australian finance podcast, Kate Campbell, who I'm very pleased to say joins us on the Savings Tip Jar right now. G'day, Kate. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts and time here today on the podcast, Kate. For the viewers who are watching on YouTube, here's a book. We gave it a read over the last few days and is very insightful. So we'll ask you a few questions about the book. So the title is Buying Happiness: Learn to Invest Your Time and Money Better. So can you really buy happiness? Share your thoughts there.
So I think you can both agree that we can't just go and buy it from the supermarket, but there's a lot of things we can do with the way we use our time and money, two very important resources we've got to give ourselves a happiness boost. So one of the biggest things that came out in the research is just the way we spend our time on our relationships with other people, because that's a huge determiner of our happiness long term. If we have quality relationships, if we are spending time with friends and family, and that doesn't usually cost very much. So sometimes we think the things that make us happy are going to be really expensive things like a trip to Europe because we've seen all of our friends do it this year, but it isn't necessarily the case. There's a lot to be said for experiences over things, but even small changes that can give us a happiness boost without spending too much more include like adding a bit of novelty. So instead of just going to the same coffee shop before work today, well, going somewhere else or meeting someone new during that time. And coffee is another one that comes up a lot because a lot of people demonize coffee in the personal finance world. Like if you cut out the coffee today, you're going to be able to buy a house tomorrow, which we know isn't the case. Yes, small things do add up, but it's often what the coffee involves. And for many of us, the coffee is like having a coffee in the morning with our partner or going for a coffee break at work with our colleagues. And the coffee involves a relationship as well. And that's what adds the value. It's not just that purchase, but it's what that purchase involves. So a big part of buying happiness is just adding a bit more to why we're spending time trying to figure out our money and trying to invest and sort our superannuation out. It's not just to build wealth. There's usually a reason behind it. Like we want to spend more time with our family, or we want to have a sense of security so we can leave a job or relationship that isn't serving us. So I think that's like the main ethos of buying happiness, is just that there's more to money than just the dollars. There's a lot more to it when it comes to our emotions and freedom and our feelings of happiness and fulfillment. So I just want people to think about money a little bit more than just a number in the bank account.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess, we can all have more money by saving it and living like a hermit. But, what's the point in money if you can't go out and spend it on doing the things you enjoy? I mean, you could get hit by a bus the next day and then you've saved up all this money and haven't really lived your life. But then at the same time, people that say live every day like it's your last, well, maybe you should also save some money in case it's not. But anyways, on that note, can you tell us a bit, Kate, about what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so I've been talking about money and personal finance to anyone who will listen for over 7 years now. But a few years ago, I read a research paper from the US by some leading researchers in the field of money and psychology and happiness. And it was called "If Money Doesn't Buy You Happiness, You're Probably Not Spending It Right." And so that was really interesting because it pulled together so many of the different studies done. And I just went down a rabbit hole because I know there's a lot that needs to be done in Australia for financial education, but a lot of it isn't accessible to people. And sometimes it just seems very boring and stale. And a lot of people don't want to be involved with money. And so this sort of gave me an angle to actually make the conversations a little bit more engaging, because most of us want to be happy or fulfilled in some sense. So thinking about, well, how can we use money as a tool to help us get there? Sure, if we've got $1 million in our bank account today, it isn't going to necessarily just like flick a switch and we'll be happy. But what are ways we can use that money to be a bit more intentional with our life? Because we only get so much in our bank account and so many hours in our calendar each month. But thinking about, well, how can we reprioritize what we're doing just a little bit more? And it doesn't need to be a overnight makeover. We're not just going to instantly transform our finances and our work and our relationships overnight, but thinking of something small this week. And even if it's just half an hour, you've always wanted to start saving a little bit more. Well, this month, can you save $5? Like, make the goal so small that you're almost laughing at how small it is. It seems a bit trivial, but a lot of people get stuck at that point between learning and taking action. So it's just making that action so small, it's possible, and that you can do it. And then you can slowly build your confidence from there, because a lot of us sit on the sidelines consuming heaps of content when it comes to money and investing, and we don't actually take that first step because that gap seems really big. So that's one of my big tips for everyone. Just make that goal super small, make it easy to start with, and then you'll build up your confidence and you'll slowly start to scale that up. So it might be $5 this month, but in a year's time, you might be saving $500 a month.
For sure. Some good entry-level advice there for someone to get started. So I read, and I think you mentioned it very briefly, that you're actually in the Air Force, and from such a young age as well. So I guess at 17, 18, you're like a sponge and you're absorbing everything in the adult world. So was there anything from your time in the Air Force that taught you about money? And I know there's like kind of that whole meme that goes on about, there's these young cadets that come in and they suddenly have a paycheck and they're on base and they buy a new flashy car at 15% interest rates. Was there anything that stood out to you from your time in the force in regards to finances and budgeting and so on?
There was certainly a lot of that going on. There was a lot of security over income, and so people were just using credit cards and buying cars on long-term leases because they knew they would have some security of income long-term, but that wasn't always the case. Like, a lot of people did end up leaving or didn't get through training and things like that. And it was during that time I was 17, I had a full-time income and I had very little living expenses because I was living on base, food was all covered. And that's a very rare situation for someone that young to have an income and not have any dependents or anyone to actually send that money to. And so the first 6 months, it was very much spend everything. And there was a big attitude of that. It wasn't really focused on saving. And so it was when I did my very first tax return and I realized, okay, I'm an adult now. I got income for the last 6 months. I got quite a bit of it, and I've got nothing in my bank account to show for it, except maybe I've had some meals out, and I've got a lot of stuff that I've purchased over this time. So that was kind of that flashbulb moment where I went, okay, I want to do a bit more with my money. I want to have a little bit put aside just in case something goes wrong or I want to do something else. And that ended up serving me really well because I didn't have to make too many big changes. Thankfully, at the time, it wasn't that hard to make big changes. I know once people have families and lots of expenses, making big changes becomes a little bit more challenging. But at the time, I was in a position to go, okay, I can actually save some money each month. I don't need to spend just left, right. I can put some money aside for me. And that sort of started me on my whole personal finance and investing journey.
Awesome. Now, obviously, investment is a big part of what you talk about in the book and being comfortable taking on risk. What I'm wondering is if it's still worth investing when you've got a big debt, such as a mortgage to pay, and particularly with interest rates as high as they are now. For example, for me, I was investing a lot in the lead up to buying a home. I had about 50% of my wealth tied up in stocks to try and accelerate the growth in my deposit. But then once I got the house and I've got the big mortgage with the big interest rate, I'm thinking every dollar is probably best put into the offset account because it's a guaranteed, risk-free return, tax-free return, at the interest rate, which is around 6%. Whereas, if I was to invest it in stocks, I'd probably need to have a return of about 9%, for it to, after tax, be as good as putting that money into an offset account. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, investing versus focusing on paying down debt.
A lot of people are having a really similar experience right now where maybe they were able to invest a lot a few years ago and now they're not able to invest as much anymore. And I think it just comes down to prioritizing. So if paying off your home loan and putting money in your offset's really important to you right now, well, if you want to keep the habit of investing alive, how can you do that in a smaller way? So some people will focus on paying down debt, but they'll just keep investing $5 a month in a micro investing app just to keep that feeling of being an investor, keep that habit going, because if you've spent years building up that habit of being a regular investor and dollar cost averaging on a monthly or a quarterly basis, well, you want to keep that feeling of making progress there. So whether it's contributing a bit extra to your super fund, adding $5 a month to a micro investing app, still working on another savings goal you have, you can keep those habits going even though you're putting less into your investments and maybe prioritizing another goal, which would be paying off debt or putting money into your offset account. So I don't think it has to be either or, but different times of your life, you're going to scale back one goal and really focus on another one. So it's something that you've got to reassess on a yearly basis. I'd say a lot of us think we can put a 10-year financial plan into place, and that's all well and good, but your life is going to change. You might decide to buy a house, you might start a family, you might decide you want to change jobs or work overseas or take a year off. So you have to make sure that you can keep your financial plan fairly adaptable, because things aren't just going to go exactly to plan for 10 years. I mean, I think that would be quite challenging.
For sure. And just on putting $5 in the micro investing app, the fees could easily eat away at that, which you did mention in the book. I checked my Raise account the other day and I was being charged $5 a month for my portfolio. So yeah, shop wisely there, I guess. But what I liked about the book too is it didn't just talk about like, do this, do that, set up an emergency fund, all that boring stuff that everyone's kind of used to. It also talked about, money culture, like the culture around money behaviors and relationships and stuff. So one of the themes I saw, especially towards the back end of the book, was like auditing your life. So let's talk about some sort of, I guess, money and relationships, and what are some kind of like emerging taboos you see popping up these days, especially in a high interest rate environment and a lot of younger people looking to get started on their investment journey?
I think money and relationships is still a challenging conversation. And I imagine you've both had conversations with friends and family, and everyone has slightly different perspectives on whether bills should be split in a relationship, split proportionately. So maybe they shouldn't be 50-50. Maybe they should be 70-30, depending on if the incomes are different, or sometimes you want to combine everything. So that's still, I feel like, an emerging space where people are just working out where they stand, because often people are coming into relationships these days with more assets. They've already built up some superannuation. They might have purchased a property on their own. And so the conversations are quite different. And I feel like that's still quite an emerging space. And it really is an area where having communication is important, because a lot of us, if we haven't spoken to anyone about money before, speaking about it in a relationship is not just going to come easily to us. So thinking about, well, how can we start talking about how we were brought up with money? Because the way our parents and our communities talk to us about money often impacts us as an adult. Like if your parent had a really bad financial experience, or lost money on a property, or had a bad experience starting a business, often that will impact you in ways you're not quite realizing today. So even if you take some time just this weekend to reflect and go, what are some of those memories I have about money when I was growing up? What stands out to me? Did my parents have a really good experience with money? Was money always a source of tension? Like, were there fights about money? Or was money seen as a great thing? And is that why I want to start a business? Because they had a great success starting a business. So just unpacking a little bit of that helps give you some of the language when you're talking to your significant other or even a close friend or family member about money. You have more of a language and understanding, so you can share where each other are coming from. I think that's a really important thing to do, because often we will just act on autopilot and we don't unpack, well, why do we think that's an important financial goal to work towards? A lot of us want to buy a house because maybe our friends and family have told us that's the only thing we should do with our money. But is that something we really want to do, or are we just acting on autopilot and potentially making a decision that's not going to be the best thing for us right now?
Yeah, certainly. And as we know, money is one of the top causes of conflict in relationships. So definitely worth, having that chat. Now, the old saying, time is money. I've read in the book that, for example, sometimes you might consider it worth spending money to save time, such as I think you said you were moving house and you deemed it worth paying a cleaner to do the bond clean. So can you, just talk a little bit about where people could be happy to pay more to save time?
Yeah, so there's actually research that shows that if we spend a bit of money to buy our time back, especially when it's on tasks that we don't really enjoy, potentially something like for me, cleaning when I was moving house, that actually gives us a happiness boost as well. And it frees up some of our time. Now, that starts to flip if we outsource everything in our life, because a lot of times, sometimes things that cause a bit of friction or aren't that enjoyable at the time add a lot of meaning and value to our lives. So you've got to be careful there. But it could even be something for you like your tax return. If you've been angry and frustrated about doing your tax return for the last few years and have been putting it off every year, that could be something that you go, okay, well, maybe this year I spend a bit of money and I outsource it to an expert accountant who's going to make my life easier, make sure everything's done correctly. And that's going to free up 5 to 10 plus hours of my life. And so that could be somewhere where you go, okay, well, I'm going to have to spend a bit of money, but it's going to free up time and take this huge task off my mental load. So that could be one way where you think about, well, how can I use my money to add a bit of value to my life? For other people, it might be buying groceries, so having them delivered to your house so you don't have to worry about that task. And for other people, maybe you are paying for a personal trainer instead of going to the gym. Maybe they come closer to you. So just thinking about maybe small ways, even if it's just something very, very small, like paying for one home cooked meal a week from a local provider, something small that you can free up some time, especially if it's a task you don't enjoy that much.
For sure. And that tax one's a good timely reminder if you haven't done your taxes already, because the deadline is looming. Kate Campbell, thanks so much for joining us on the Savings Tip Jar podcast. That's all we have time for today. And your book is now available to purchase, and it's a great read. So everyone, take a look at it. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Kate.